modeled in our database the reviews table. We've seen that in a working app that we can, in fact, access these reviews. How should we think about the routing? Routing for associations is one of the most common challenges of designing nice RESTful applications. But it turns out, of course, there are patterns and best practices for this. And so how should we think about updating through associations? Well, when creating a review, how do we keep track of which movie and which moviegoer is creating that review? We need this info at the creation time of a movie. We have things like new movie path that are provided by our Rails routes, but how would we know necessarily the review or the path of both a particular review and a particular movie? Or how do we make sure that, given some model, it is linked to both the right associations? And so Rails is going to provide routing for doing this. And in this case, what we're going to do is our routing is going to nest our reviews within a movie. There are multiple possible designs for this, but the way to think about this is each review belongs to a movie, and so that's going to be the interface that we model. Notably, we did have a user's model where a review also belongs to a user. We could have reviews nested under a user, perhaps, and have a similar design. But in our case, what is the user going to do? If they go to a movie page, they'll probably be on that page for that movie when they leave a review. And so our routing is going to inform, we say, resources movies, do, in a nested block, resources reviews. And this is going to tell Rails that I'm going to have routes which have not just a movie ID, but also a review ID within those routes. So what does this look like? Well, it's pretty surprising how quickly our app has grown in the number of things that we can do. But if we ask for bin Rails routes, we can then use the grep command for review just to focus on those. And what do we get here? We get our same CRUD and index actions before, but notice in this case that the actual path and the helpers that exist focus on two things. So we have, importantly, first at the top, movie review path, and all of these things in our path helpers have both a movie and a review. And what that essentially allows us to do is, given a particular URL, I will specify something like, in this case, let's say get movies/movie ID /reviews/ in this case ID, and then perhaps edit or new or whatever it might be. But notice what Rails has set up here. On the page that we're working about, if we are creating a review, our URL is going to have, if we're editing a review, since it's already been created, what we're going to be looking at is the ID of a specific review. And that ID that is unprefixed is always going to be the thing, the particular model that we're working with. But in our route, now the parameter that defines the movie is not just ID, but movie_ID. And the way to think about this, right, is that that movie ID should match exactly to the movie ID column in our database. And Rails routes will help us see all those. So what does that look like now when we write our reviews controller? Well, with associations, there's multiple ways to write these controllers. But if we're thinking about a post or create action, if we use Rails generate and we get nested routes, what's actually going to happen is, we'll see the route here for creating a movie is going to be movies/1 or whatever the movie ID is /reviews. And when we create this, we now have access to setting the movie by params movie ID. So remember, we're in the reviews controller here. To find the movie, we do movies.find by params movie ID, or probably a set movie controller filter. How do I make a new review? Well, I can make a new review by saying at movie.reviews.build of my review parameters. Again, those parameters come from whatever form has been filled out. And if everything is successful, I get to redirect to, well, I could choose what I want to do, but in this case, the movies review path for a particular movie. And that might list all of the reviews for that movie so that you could see, after you create a review, all the reviews for that movie. I could, of course, redirect to an individual review. The particular design in the app, might depend. But in this case, notably here, the path that I'm using has both movie and reviews in the path helper. If something fails, we can just re-render the new page. In Reviews Controller, what does our new action look like? Well, there's a lot of different ways, again, that we can write this. I need to create a reviews model for that form to render properly. So again, I have my movie. And how do I build a new review? Well, at movie.reviews.new will create a valid review object, which is already linked to this particular movie. Typically, we would say @review or equals movie.reviews.new. This helps protect if we've already loaded the review perhaps through some controller filter, but you can write, this action can be written in different ways. What we might commonly say is load a movie and a before filter as well, and just protect and make sure that that movie exists. That way, if we go to movies/100/reviews, we have a way of sort of protecting against that movie. But your controller actions will sort of depend on exactly what you want the user experience to look like. So how do we do this? How do we make the actual page in our application? Rails now provides multiple different form helpers. So the one that I'm going to show right now is what's called form with. There's also form tag and form for. They all have slightly different use cases. But what does our form helper look like? Well, in this case, when we have nested associations, what model am I trying to access? Review. What is the URL to this particular model? Well, it is the path for movie and review, if those are both defined. And then I say do, and like any other form, I create the form fields. So in this form, what model does this apply to? Well, the nice thing about form with is that the model that it applies to is explicitly defined in the form with method. This is a newer Rails thing that we have to tell it exactly which model, but this clears up a lot of confusion because we're very explicitly creating a form for review. We can create this form in a lot of different ways, but by setting it up such that a review is always linked to a movie, we have an invariant or condition that will always be true that a review is always associated with a movie. In different versions of Rails, you might use form for, and form for is a little bit shorter to work with. It still exists in current versions of Rails, but what I give form for is just a URL. So if I give form for, the URL is movie reviews path at movie and at review, if that's what's defined in our view. What model does this apply to? Well, we're still trying to create a review, so it's still going to apply our form fields to the review, but it's a little bit less explicit. How does form for decide what model we're actually trying to use when we have compound resources? Essentially, it's sort of the innermost thing, the review, because it is the most unique part of this URL, right? It is the thing that only has an unprefixed ID. It's the innermost resource, however you want to think about it. But the goal is, if I'm using form for in certain versions of Rails, the model that I want to create the form of is going to be that inner nested resource. Debugging exactly the different syntaxes of forms can be a little bit challenging. So that's a place where, again, looking up the particular syntax in the docs is helpful. But in either case, despite the fact that this thing is nested, our forms don't really change. Our attributes that create will have the same structure in the form as they would for a movie or something else.